recording. Perfect. Good evening. We are so glad that you're here. My name is Carissa Jager Sanders, and I, along with Javni Moore, a fellow PhD student, we serve as the co-managing editors of the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology. And although Javni is unable to be here tonight in person, she sends her love, and it is our joy and privilege to gather with you for an evening of celebration and critical scholarship, which especially highlights feminist theology and social justice in Islam. Back in the spring, I had a dream and a vision for an event that celebrated liberative theology and promoted social justice that all started with a conversation between me and Dr. Dhala, our keynote speaker. And in keeping with the heart of the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology, which is one of the academic journals of the Graduate Theological Union, and the Women's Studies and Religion program here at the GTU, we gather as advocates for the centrality of feminist and liberative theologies, working for social justice in academia. We celebrate the historical and ongoing leading role of women upon the intellectual and material fronts of liberation. And tonight, we are beyond honored to have Dr. Mahjabeen Dhala as our keynote speaker. She is the Assistant Professor of Islamic Studies, Director of the Madrasa Midrasha program, and an alum of the Graduate Theological Union. She recently served as the chair of the Women's Study in Religion program, and tonight she will be presenting on her recent monograph, Feminist Theology and Social Justice in Islam, a study on the Sermon of Fatima. We are also delighted to have a student panel of emerging scholar activists who will offer responses to her work. And Dr. Cheryl Johnson, who is a G2 alum, who also served as the student program coordinator for the WSR when she was a student, will serve as our panel moderator. Our panelists include emerging activist scholars who are all graduate students here at the GTU. We have Raya Hazini, Diane Saunders, Latessa Isler, Yanan Liu, and Zainab Bessel. We will engage together in critical thought and practice this evening, which indeed in and of itself helps to advance the realization of a just, flourishing, feminist, and decolonized world. And in that vein, we want to start by offering a proper land acknowledgement. And although Javni, my co-editor, is not able to be with us, together we collectively wrote this statement, this collaborative piece. The Graduate Theological Union recognizes that we sit and work on the territory of the Huchen, the original landscape of the Choqueño-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This region continues to be of great importance to the Muwakma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Graduate Theological Union community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1962. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship with Native peoples. And as members of this community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also recognize that the Muwakma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of Berkeley and the broader Bay Area community today. This evening's conference and the corresponding scholarly work are rooted in and have been produced on the unceded, sacred, and traditional territories of these people who hold judicial rights and titles to the land. Since time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have walked this land and walked it in a good way, harvesting foods and medicines and making good ceremonies here. The abundance of the lands and waters yet remaining today is due to relationships of reciprocity, their traditional knowledge systems, and structures of governance by which the Ohlone people have lived and continue to live today. And for those of us currently in North America and beyond, this means we are residing on stolen Indigenous territory, and that we each hold responsibilities to be aware of which nations those are, and to abide by their sovereign jurisdiction. And as we've seen as people of night in the chat, that we are coming from all over. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat to help you know on whose native land you stand and sit if you don't already know. Let's see here. Let me grab my link. And this one you can go and type in your address or find your location, and it will tell you on who the native indigenous people are of your land. Acknowledgement of the land necessitates recognition of the historical and ongoing colonialization of indigenous peoples across the Bay Area of California and beyond. Moreover, acknowledgement of the land recognizes the structures of colonialism on a world scale today, maintained by Western imperialism. The disparities of material conditions between indigenous and non-indigenous people, the breaking down of planetary life systems, and the permanent de-development of the global South, on whom Western wealth and geopolitical hegemony are derived and are due to the historical and ongoing theft of indigenous lands, epistemologies, cosmologies, cultures, creative production, and labor. However, wherever there is oppression, there is also resistance. Wherever there is oppression, there is also resistance. This is a tenet at the heart of anti-colonial thought. And indeed, despite the serial efforts of Euro-Western powers throughout history, anti-colonial and national liberation movements of the Third World continue to rise up. And decolonization is not merely a metaphor. It brings about the repatriation of indigenous land and life and the renewed and continuing existence. And non-indigenous people carry responsibility to live by the jurisdiction and good protocols of their host nations, taking concrete actions to end colonialism and giving unequivocal support to all indigenous people struggling for liberation, who are bringing about a just, flourishing, and decolonized world once and for all. And this scholarly night intends to be a concrete and precise contribution to the work of revolt, revolution, and love. And now we will take a moment of silence so that we can each acknowledge the land where we are. Thank you. Every anti-colonial liberation struggle is connected. They are courageous movements of resistance, resilience, and remembrance that act as sources of inspiration. And as the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology and the Graduate Theological Union community, we stand in unequivocal support of all Indigenous peoples and people of the global South, fighting for self-determination, national liberation, and global decolonization. And now I will invite Diane Saunders, who is a PhD student and our outgoing student program coordinator for the WSR, to tell us more about the Women's Study and Religious program here at the GTU. Diane, please unmute yourself and tell us all about it.
Thank you, Carissa, and thank you for that inspiring beginning to this incredible night we have ahead of us. Carissa and Javni asked me to write a bit of a reflection on the WSR program for this journal, and I had the opportunity to interview a few of the long-standing leaders. And here's a quote to give you a sense of the length and the breadth of the GTU of the WSR program at GTU from Dr. Arthur Holder, the longest standing dean. Dr. Holder explains that the long history of women's studies at the GTU goes back to the founding of the Center of Women and Religion in 1970. After the center closed in 2004, the Women's Studies and Religion program was established to carry on the work through a certificate program and a robust array of courses, conferences, workshops, and symposia. For half a century, the faculty and students involved in these groundbreaking programs have explored the interface of religion and gender with creativity, critical reflection, and a strong sense of mutual support. Their efforts have greatly enhanced scholarship across disciplines and traditions throughout the GTU and the wider academic community. And with that, I will just to kind of give you a sense of the focus and the mission of women's studies, and then ways that you can all continue to be involved. The Women's Studies in Religion program, certificate program, works to sustain, promote, and advance the commitment to the study of women, gender, and religion, emphasizing conversations across the difference of race, sexual and gender orientation, ethnicity, class, culture, nationality, and religious orientation. And as Carissa shared, I've had the privilege of serving as the program coordinator over the last 3 years, serving under Dr. Dhala and Dr. Ashley Bachi. And for ways to be involved in the WSR program, next will be Callie, and she will be introducing Dr. Dhala, is our program coordinator this year. You can reach out to her to be included on the WSR email list, and there you'll receive updates on upcoming programs and also events from the Gender Consortium at UC Berkeley and other organizations that share in the mission of women's studies and theological and religious disciplines. You're welcome and invited to attend events sponsored by the WSR certificate program. And before the night's over, you'll hear about upcoming events for this fall. You're welcome to take the WSR seminar. Myself, Yanan Liu, and Dr. Kirsty Sterna, our faculty chair for this year, will be team teaching the WSR seminar coming up this spring. This is sort of our signature program of the WSR program, is the certificate. And so you're welcome to pursue the certificate, which involves taking the WSR seminar class, taking 3 classes related to pertaining to women's studies, and attend 6 co-curricular WSR events. We have a list of suggested courses that offer a collection from each semester for classes that focus on issues of scholarship related directly to women's studies. And you can become a member of the advisory committee, which is a wonderful way to engage in the mentoring of all the faculty advisors that serve WSR. Thank you, Carissa.
Thank you, Diane. That is wonderful to hear. And I want to tell you a little bit about the journal that is hosting this event. The Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology is an international and diverse forum for which cutting-edge scholarship in religious studies, philosophy, and theology that reflects the GTU's endeavor to be a nexus for where the religion meets the world. And in fulfillment of this aspect of the mission, the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology is committed to publishing and making accessible on at least an annual basis original research by scholars throughout the world that is representative of the various religious expressions and theological traditions and perspectives within the GTU community. It is a peer-reviewed journal that publishes lectures and prize-winning essays from the GTU Consortial Committee, as well as original research submitted for publication. We invite authors who are interested in submitting articles or books for publication to consult our information for authors or book review sites for further details. And we are committed to being part of the conversation that advances the frontiers of religion and theological thought. And we invite you to consider how you can contribute. And I will say more on the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology and our current issue and our forthcoming one toward the end of the program. And then I will put a link in the chat to help you know where you can go for that. But now let's get to the main event, what we've all been waiting for. I'm going to have Kali introduce, she's a PhD student and our incoming student coordinator for the WSR, introduce Dr. Dhala, our keynote speaker. Kali, the floor is yours.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to see the turnout tonight. I hope everyone, wherever you are in the world, is feeling good and excited and inspired to be part of our lovely group tonight. And I'm so honored to have been asked to introduce Dr. Dhala. I've worked really closely with Dr. Dhala in various capacities, including on the steering committee, as well as her teaching assistant during the WSR seminar during the past spring. These experiences have really given me an invaluable perspective on her pedagogical approach, which is defined really by compassion, collaboration, and constructive engagement. Dr. Dalla masterfully creates a learning environment where vulnerability is embraced, fostering genuine reflection and growth. Her approach goes beyond conventional academic rigor. She nurtures an atmosphere where students feel encouraged to bring their whole selves to the classroom, blending intellectual inquiry with emotional awareness. Through her leadership in WSR and the WSR seminar, I have personally witnessed her dedication to fostering an inclusive community that prioritizes the voices of the marginalized groups, particularly women in Islam. The mental health piece that she brings into this, the emotional vulnerability and the authenticity, is so special to behold for me because I'm a therapist, I'm a practicing therapist. Being in our classes is almost like therapy. And I know Jasmine, who was a student with us in the previous seminar, I'm sure you're able to share in some of the sentiments I've shared here tonight. And just to say some more about Dr. Dalla, Dr. Dalla's ability to guide students through challenging topics with sensitivity and insight has profoundly impacted me as a scholar and an educator. Her emphasis on, sorry, I think someone's unmuted, really apologize. Her emphasis on cultivating a supportive space for discourse and her accessible, responsive approach has really significantly influenced my teaching philosophy. Beyond the classroom, her collaborative spirit shines through. In committee meetings, in seminars, she approaches every conversation with openness and a genuine desire to learn from others. Her feedback is always constructive, highlights areas for growth, while celebrating strengths and fostering a collective spirit of purpose and growth. I have personally experienced this. I know there have been times when I've messed up over the course of our teaching experience together, and she's shown me such grace and warmth as she sort of guided me through those experiences. So Dr. Dalla's contributions to academic scholarship, community engagement, and exceptional teaching style make her an inspirational figure in Islamic studies. Her work exemplifies the power of education to enact social change, and it has really been an honor to be part of her journey. Thank you, Dr. Dalla. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kali. That is such a warm and generous introduction. Thank you so much. Yeah, so let's get started. I'm just so excited to be here participating with you in this fantastic evening. Greetings of peace to everyone. Like I begin every class, I invite you now to join me in taking a few deep breaths. And with each breath, let us reflect on the blessings we so often take for granted. I so often take for granted. The gift of life in every inhale. The curiosity that drives us to question and learn. Our families, our communities that ground us, and the legacy of our ancestors who have shaped our paths. In this moment of stillness, let us offer our gratitude for these gifts and so many others. And as we breathe intentionally, let us also hold space for those who are suffering, the wounded, the grieving, the denied, the oppressed, especially those enduring violence and turmoil that is tragically justified in the name of religion and some perverted, misguided idea about supremacy. May we strive for a world rooted in compassion, justice, and peace. Amen. I am deeply grateful to the Berkeley Journal of Religion and Theology and the Women's Studies and Religion program at the GTU for organizing this remarkable evening. What fills me with immense pride is that this gathering has been entirely conceived, organized, and brought to life by our brilliant students. You are the finest ambassadors of the GTU, and we fully believe in the transformative power of your scholarship. Your work carries the potential to bring healing and positive change to a world in deep and genuine need. As an interreligious and interdisciplinary cohort, you stand as the bold new face of the future of religious studies. Yay to the GTU students. But before I begin, I must say that the GTU offered me a unique environment and a dynamic platform for my academic study on the sermon. As a student, I found peers and mentors who engage with traditional sacred texts and practices across religious traditions, while also exploring critical theoretical frameworks, including feminist, liberationist, and post-colonial and anti-colonial perspectives. As faculty, I continue to enjoy academic freedom in this space and the opportunity to collaborate with colleagues investigating the intersection of religion with issues like gender, race, environment, and natural sciences, and producing cutting-edge interreligious scholarship on the way. So yay to the GTU faculty as well. I want to thank all of you for joining me in celebrating Feminist Theology and Social Justice in Islam, a study on the Sermon of Fatima. It took me 5 years to research and write this book, initially as my dissertation for my committee, and then reworking it into a monograph for a broader academic audience. After that, I spent around 2 years in the editing process and navigating anonymous peer reviews and comments. When I finally received the contract from Cambridge University Press, and I remember where I was and what I was doing when I opened the email, I stopped everything and fell into prostration, thanking the Lord. Yes, that's what we Muslims do. We will fall into prostration and say, thank you, God. What I'd been teaching and presenting for 7 years in academia and for more than 2 decades in my community would finally be available as a work that would have a life beyond my own. I am so grateful that I am holding this book in my hands today. For my talk this evening, I want to begin by offering a brief overview of the historical significance of the sermon and its contemporary relevance in framing women's voices within Islamic scholarship. Then I want to turn our attention to the Quranic concept of Hujjah Ilahiyya. Translated in English, it would mean divine proof or divine argument. A powerful framework that I argue invites us to rethink religious leadership and authority in the Islamic doctrine, offering new pathways for justice, equity, and spiritual empowerment. So speaking within the historical context, the sermon emphasizes Fatima's unique position as the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and on his family, as a figure who holds religious, social, and political importance. The sermon is a powerful example of a woman engaging in public discourse, asserting her rights over the estate of this land called Fadak, and offering a deep theological critique of the socio-political shifts occurring after the Prophet's death. The sermon exemplifies a woman's direct intervention in matters of political and economic justice, underpinned by religious principles. Her stand against the caliph of her time, Abu Bakr, is extraordinary on multiple levels, embodying a powerful interplay of social, political, and theological dynamics. The sheer audacity and courage it must have taken for a young woman, likely between the ages of 18 and 25, to confront a man in his 60s, who also happens to be the head of state, is nothing short of remarkable. The power dynamics are fascinating, especially considering the influential women who came to her defense, including a woman by the name of Asma bint Umays, the wife of the very caliph she was challenging. Their testimonies, though compelling, were ultimately dismissed and denied, reflecting the entrenched patriarchal structures that might have existed at that time and that resisted women's voices. What stands out even more for me from a theological perspective is that Fatima's argument was not merely driven by emotion or familial grievance. Rather, she engaged in a deeply Quranic theological discourse. Her protest became a profound commentary on the nature of God, prophethood, eschatology, and the ethical and moral responsibilities of leadership. When she challenged the caliph with the question, and I quote here, she said, "Where is it in the book of God that you inherit your father and I do not inherit mine?" She was not just making a legal claim. She was asserting her deep knowledge of the sacred text of Muslims. The caliph's immediate response was to invoke a hadith. A hadith is a saying attributed to the prophet. So his response was to invoke a hadith allegedly from the prophet, claiming that prophets do not leave inheritance and that their assets become state property after their demise. But Fatima did not accept this without scrutiny. She questioned the authenticity of the narration by countering it with 5 different verses of the Quran, demonstrating her mastery over the sacred text and placing her argument within the framework of Islamic theology. I'm going to quote a few instances from the sermon here. When she heard this from the caliph, saying that I have heard your father say that prophets do not leave any inheritance behind, she retorted, "Are you seriously neglecting the book of God, casting it behind your backs?" And then she started delineating 5 verses, challenging the authenticity of this hadith. First, she quoted Q27, verse 16, which says, Solomon inherited from David. So she's saying, how could my father have said that prophets don't inherit when the Quran is talking about this story of Solomon and David and as inheritors? Second verse, Q19, verse 5 and 6, where she's talking about, where the Quran is talking about the narrative of Zechariah and John the Baptist, when Zechariah makes this prayer. So grant me from yourself, O Lord, an heir who may inherit from me and inherit from the house of Jacob. This is clearly going against the hadith that the caliph has just narrated. Third verse is Q8, verse 75, which is an injunction upon the believers that talks about how to bequeath your property. It says, blood relatives are more entitled to inherit from one another in the book of God, end quote. The fourth verse that she presents is Q4, verse 11, where God says, God enjoins you concerning your children, for the male shall be the like of the share of 2 females. She's trying to put a point across that daughters are expected to inherit. And lastly, the 5th verse that she puts out there is Q2, verse 180, which says, and if a believer leaves behind any property, it is ordained that the believer must make a bequest for his parents and relatives in an honorable manner. This is an obligation for those who are God-wary. After quoting these 5 verses, she asks, yet you claim that I have no right to and no share in my father's inheritance? That's an open challenge she's throwing out there to the entire community that has gathered in the Prophet's mosque. In my research, I argue that this might well be the first instance in the post-prophetic Islamic history where an individual, regardless of gender, employed such a methodology to advocate for their rights. So why has this remained largely unknown? Does Fatima's protest create a problematic moment, not only for the caliph, but also for the Islamic theologians, hadith scholars, and historians that will come and will perpetuate a predominantly male-dominated understanding of Islam? These critical questions, which emerge from the study of Fatima's sermon, carry profound implications for both A, understanding how a critical engagement with the Quran was perceived in Fatima's time, that's the 7th century, and B, the implications on contemporary Muslim feminist and liberationist scholarship. One must ask, to what extent did Muslims of that era truly view, venerate, and live by the Quran in a way later generations and centuries would? While it may seem reasonable to assume that Abu Bakr, the caliph, would be swayed by the word of God, it's important to consider the broader cultural context of the time. If many Arabs, including the early Muslim community, were still influenced by the pre-Islamic social and political norms that viewed the Prophet primarily as a powerful leader who gained dominance through political victories rather than as an agent of divine reform, then perhaps Quranic arguments might not have resonated with them in the same way. So what I'm saying is that when Fatima presented her Quran-based and theologically grounded arguments, we must ask, was she employing a methodology that spoke to the theological ideals of Islam? Yes, but not necessarily to the prevailing sensibilities of her audience. If the Quran had not yet fully supplanted the entrenched pre-Islamic traditions in the minds of those in power, her appeal to sacred text may have been more radical than we often realize. An argument ahead of its time, addressing a community not yet fully aligned with the Quranic vision of justice and authority. This tension raises important questions for us today about the dynamics between divine revelation, cultural norms, and power structures, offering rich insights for contemporary feminist and liberationist scholarship. This moment in the sermon, this moment when she is critiquing a hadith with 5 different verses of the Quran, this moment is not just a clash of wills. It's not a mere he said, she said situation. It is a profound theological debate that challenges the legitimacy of male-dominated interpretations of Islamic law and leadership. Through this act, Fatima emerges as a powerful model for Muslim women, not only as an activist, but as a theologian, reshaping the discourse on authority, justice, and women's roles in Islamic history. For Islamic scholarship in contemporary times, especially within the area of women's theology, her voice stands as a powerful symbol in the fight against injustice. In my book, I present Fatima as a model of female activism rooted in a deeply religious framework. And sometimes that is perceived as a dichotomy. Her protest continues to resonate with contemporary Muslim women who navigate spaces where their roles are restricted, not only by traditional interpretations of Islamic texts, but sometimes by contemporary socio-political constraints. By invoking Quranic verses, prophetic traditions, and her understanding of justice, Fatima situates herself as a religious authority in a male-dominated space, demonstrating how women in early Islam were engaged in complex theological and political debates. For the remainder of my talk this evening, I want to present the Quranic concept of Hujja Ilahiyya, divine argument, divine proof, to expand and expound on the notion of religious authority in Islam. I want to begin with Q4, verse 165. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. رسل مبشرين ومنذرين لئلا يكون للناس على الله حجة بعد الرسل. In translation, this verse says, God created or raised prophets, apostles, as bearers of good news and warners, so that humankind may not have any argument against God after the sending of these apostles. So the word hujjah in the verse is translated as God's argument against people who claim that they do not know. Exegetes such as Tabari, Tabatabai, and also Makarim Shirazi note that prophets and sacred texts are among the signs of God, serving as divine arguments, again the word hujjah, against claims of ignorance or incapacity to implement divine wisdom in human conduct. The concept of hujjah, divine proof, divine argument, thus encompasses not only prophets, but also sacred books, and potentially, as I want to share momentarily, more expansive embodiments of divine authority. Let's look at that. In the Quran, prophets are referred to as hujjah, and we saw that in Q4, verse 165. And that very verse describes them as mundhirin, warners. So one of the characteristics of the hujjah is that they are warners. Fatima in her sermon identifies herself as a warner. When she introduces herself to the audience, she says, I stand before you as a warner, daughter of the warner. In a vivid metaphor, she likens leadership to a camel, saying, you have saddled a camel that is not yours. You're molesting it. You've taken hold of its reins. You've muzzled it. You've saddled it. It is hurting. Its udders will bleed, and it will surely confront you on the day of judgment with its sore back and its sporadic hooves, ever disgraceful, branded with the wrath of God and eternal dishonor. And on that day, God will be the best judge. Was that day in the Prophet's mosque as she stood before the audience not an instance of God's hujjah in the form of a female body addressing the Muslim community? Her words carry the weight of divine warning, invoking the prophetic tradition and challenging the caliph's authority with a boldness and theological precision that embody the Quranic role of a warner, of a hujjah. This rhetorical stance positions her not just as the daughter of the prophet, but as a living testament to the power of divine argument, to the power of hujjah in confronting injustice. Moving along, the Quran associates prophets as hujjah with a unique ability to receive divine revelation. So if this is one of the characteristics of the hujjah, then we see that the Quran also speaks of revelation descending upon women who are not recognized as prophets. For example, in the case of Moses, Q20, verse 39 and 38 and 39 state, we revealed to your mother, O Moses, what we revealed. Put him in the casket and cast it into the river. Clearly, this verse is talking about a revelation that descends upon Jochebed, the mother of Moses. Likewise, concerning Mary, Q19, verses 17 to 21, narrate the moment of revelation. God says, we send to her our spirit. And he appeared before her as a well-proportioned man. She said, I seek refuge in the All-Merciful from you, if you are God-conscious. He said, I am only a messenger from your Lord to give you the tidings of a pure son. She said, how can I have a son when no man has touched me, and I have not been unchaste? He said, so it will be. Your Lord says, it is easy for me, so that we may make this child a sign for humankind and a mercy from us. This matter is already decreed. These verses reveal Mary and Jochebed, the mother of Moses, as recipients of divine revelation, foretellers of revolutionary prophets, and also active agents in the execution of that plan of God. These verses highlight their essential roles, not merely as passive vessels, but as divine instruments who through their actions bring forth God's will, embodying a deeper understanding of Hujjah, which includes women as integral participants in divine history. Furthermore, in verses such as Q62 verse 2 and Q48 verse 8, prophets are identified as Hujjah and are described as teachers in this world and witnesses to human choices on the day of judgment. If the role of Hujjah then includes both teaching and bearing witness, it's noteworthy that even non-human entities can serve this divine purpose. For example, in Q5, verse 31, a crow becomes a teacher in the story of Cain and Abel. And as the narrative goes, after Cain commits the first murder in human history by killing his brother Abel, he is at a loss for how to dispose of the body. The verse recounts how God sends two crows, which fought until one killed the other. The surviving raven or crow then dug a hole with its feet and buried the dead crow, thus demonstrating to Cain, and by extension to later Muslims, the proper method of burial. And if we're thinking of the Hujjah's role as a witness, Q99 states, and I quote, when the earth is rocked with a terrible quake, and the earth discharges her burdens, and the human says, what is the matter with her? On that day, she will relate her chronicles, for her Lord will have inspired her. On that day, humankind will issue forth in various groups to be shown their deeds. So whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. End quote. This chapter portrays the earth we tread not merely as a passive surface, but as a conscious, sentient entity, a living witness that meticulously records our every action. And on Judgment Day, she will reveal this record, bearing testimony to all that has transpired upon her, an undeniable account of our deeds, both good and bad. The earth, in this sense, becomes a powerful witness, reminding us that our actions leave an indelible mark on the universe, one that will be fully unveiled in the divine reckoning. These examples suggest that God's signs and lessons can come from various sources, the Hujjah, human and otherwise, reinforcing the idea of the role of Hujjah as expansive. Just as prophets and sacred texts serve as divine arguments, so do natural phenomena, such as the actions of the crow and the testimony of the earth. They reveal divine wisdom and guidance for humanity. In understanding the interplay between religious authority, Hujjah, and its impact on human conduct, this concept of Hujjah extends even further. Just as the crow served as a divine sign in the story of Cain and Abel, might the hurting universe today also be a divine argument, urging us to correct our choices? If hujjah, divine proof, divine argument, includes all forms of divine instruction and warning, then the environmental degradation, climate crisis, and suffering of the more than human world could be seen as divine signs, an authority upon us, calling us to be more mindful, not only of the inequities inflicted upon humanity, but also upon the natural world. This understanding of hujjah broadens our understanding of justice and ethical responsibility, urging us to respond to the divine argument presented by the universe itself, a plea for balance, equity, and stewardship of all creation. In conclusion, I want to return to the significance of Fatima's sermon and how that inspired me to start thinking about this Quranic concept of hujjah, and how that might lend in rethinking religious leadership and authority, and especially the role of women in it. In my study in this book, I present the Khutbat Fadakiyya, which is the Sermon of Fatima, as a beacon of Islamic feminist thought, a visionary call for justice, leadership, and ethics that resonates across both historical and contemporary contexts. Fatima's voice challenges us to create a more inclusive scholarship where women's contributions are not marginalized, but celebrated as central to the tradition. The future of Islamic scholarship must involve a re-examination of texts like this sermon through a lens that honors both its deep theological insights and its radical commitment to social justice. By doing so, we acknowledge pre-modern Muslim women not merely as transmitters of knowledge, but also as producers of essential extra-Quranic intellectual resources. This will open doors for more Muslim women to engage with classical scholarship, not just as students, but also as scholars in their own right, and as leaders who will shape the religious discourse of our time. Thank you so much for giving me your attention. I look forward to your questions and feedback later in this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhala. Let's all show signs of our appreciation, maybe with some clapping hands, emojis, physical hands, whatever feels appropriate. What a wonderful, wonderful lecture and a wonderful delivery too. I feel like, this is just such a perfect talk because it really exemplifies not only the rigorous content and scriptural analysis that you offer, but your own skill as a preacher, as an orator, as a teacher. So thank you so much for this really inspiring talk, so passionately delivered. I'm so delighted to have been given the opportunity to respond to Dr. Dhala first. Some of you may know that we are co-authors, we've been co-teachers, we've been colleagues and friends. She's become a beloved interfaith guest preacher at my church, and I'm just so delighted every time I have the opportunity to collaborate and learn from her. I know that many of you also have had these wonderful opportunities, but if you haven't, I really encourage you to take a course with her or to read her book if you haven't yet purchased your copy. I know that you will be delighted and enriched by all that she has to share. Responding to our lecture this evening, I encourage you, if you have questions, to please begin to put those in the chat, and we will turn to open questions after my response and our student panelists' response. This evening, I will just begin with some general remarks, and we'll have our student panelists responding to some specific chapters of Dr. Dhala's book. So I'd like to just begin by reflecting on the significance, why it matters not only theologically, but also sociologically and geopolitically, to situate feminism and social justice firmly within Islam, firmly within the Quran, and within ancient revered leaders such as Fatima. Many of us will know the extremely dangerous tropes that posit that Islam is diametrically opposed to feminism and social justice, and that these tropes have real-world consequences. They have been used to justify Islamophobia, military interventions, imperialism, exclusionary social policies and practices, interpersonal discrimination, and so forth. We know that wars and military incursions have been justified based on the notion that this violence may in fact be benevolent as a way of rescuing Muslim women, quote unquote. And for people like me who are white, of European heritage, we need to particularly take note that Muslim women do not need to be saved from themselves, that to be liberated can be found within one's culture and tradition, and that in fact there are many important correctives that we who are white feminists can gain from women such as Dr. Dhala and other leaders who are working within their religion, within their communities, to find that liberation within, defined perhaps differently by their own understandings of the good life, of liberation, and of flourishing. So I believe that the significance of this work is manifold, but broadly speaking, this work is so important to our contemporary society because it challenges patronizing attitudes towards Muslim women and critiques the notion that to be Muslim is to be marginalized for women. And even more broadly, for those of us who identify as various religions, critiques the idea that to be religious is to be oppressed. So at the same time, though, Dr. Dhala shows that Islamic feminism and so approaches to social justice are distinct. They're not the same. We're not all simply climbing different paths up the same mountain, that there are uniquely Islamic understandings of what feminism and social justice mean, and methodologies that are appropriate and resonant to that tradition. So we see in her talk tonight the use of scripture, the use of debate and dialogue, the use of the sermon, the use of turning to one's tradition as a means for liberation. So as perhaps a beginning question to start to pose, I would be curious to think about if there is a new term that perhaps could sort of show some of those distinctive elements, perhaps a new definition, a new term such as we've seen with the development of womanist thought and mujerista thought, if in fact it might be helpful to have a distinctive term for Islamic feminism that could be helpful to encapsulate some of the distinctive qualities of this approach. So I don't know if that could just be something that we can continue to ponder and perhaps is part of a movement that's already building that perhaps I'm not aware of yet myself. And then just another question that I was wondering about listening to your talk, but also wondering about how the Sermon of Fatima can be used as an ancient prototype, as an ancestor for especially young women who today, and to ask about the new media, the platforms that you may be seeing that they are using to share their own sermons, particularly if they may be restricted from official venues or forms. What are some of the alternative platforms that are being found to share one's own views and one's own calls for justice and greater place for women within the traditions? So I will just leave those questions there for now, but let's turn first to our student panelists. So our first panelist to respond is Raya Hazini. So I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So I am in charge of going through the introduction and as well as chapter 1. So Dr. Dhala has examined the role of Fatima and the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him and his family, as both a theologian and an advocate for social justice in the 7th century in Islamic tradition. Dr. Dhala offers a nuanced analysis of Fatima, contributing to a gender empowerment within Islam, highlighting her role in shaping Shia thought and broadening the imposition of her life and women's rights in religion and the politic context. What I found compelling is the interdisciplinary dialogue. Dr. Dhala uses both Shia and Sunni sources in her analysis. For instance, She juxtaposes the work of al-Tabatabai and al-Tabarsi, who is a Sunni, and demonstrates how scholars from different traditions can be brought into a dialogue of enriched understanding of Islamic history and culture, or theology. As the emerging scholar focusing on women's voices in religion tradition, I found that Dr. Dahla's work particularly valuable. She highlights Fatima's pivotal role in Islamic history, providing a fresh perspective and underscoring her theological and social significance. The framework that of the discourse that Dr. Dhala defines her approach early in the text, page number 2, if you have her book, right here, and positions her studies in the intersection of theology and women's study. She builds on Fatima's sacred status in Shia theology while also contributing to women's empowerment, especially those in the political minorities from within Islamic tradition. I found really that in the introduction, Dr. Dhala actually names 14 different biographers. And again, this is not a biography of Fatima, but it also shows that work has been done, but these texts of the 14 biographers emphasize Fatima's contribution to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him and his family, and the 12 Imams, positioning her as a vital figure within Islamic history. What I found intriguing was it was particularly through invoking quotes from the introduction, again, page number 2, captures Dr. Dhala what I think is her central thesis. This contextual historical analysis of the Sermon of Fatima traces the early origins of female empowerment and agency in Islam, challenging a common Western notion of God-centric Muslim women who are unable, unwilling, and unauthorized to actively engage in promoting social justice. One of the verses, now I'm going to jump into chapter 1 that I absolutely love is the verse on light. This captures the breakdown of the metaphors of the verse of light, and imagining the lamp placed in a niche along with its components, serving as a symbol of Fatima, Ali, Hassan, Hussein, an offering, and as well as her father, the Prophet Muhammad, offering a deep insight into the theological symbolism in Islamic tradition. The theological impact. Dr. Dhala uses the Quranic verses to build a theological framework along with the exegetes that she uses throughout the book for Fatima and the women's inheritance rights within the Quran. I find that as a reader and a non-Muslim, throughout this Dr. Dahla's book, I see that the Quran I see that the Quran's Quranic understanding of comes down to a linguistic understanding of Arabic, which is, when used in a mixed gender audience, is a masculine form. And Dr. Dhala breaks that down pretty easily for us. What I see Dr. Dhala book is different from other Muslim books on Fatima, is that Dr. Dhala stands out and evaluates narratives about historical Muslim women like Fatima, aims to foster a more diversitized and inclusive understanding of feminine discourse within Islam. She works, her work challenges traditional readings of Islamic texts and advocates for the empowerment of women from within the tradition. For me, the Dr. Dhalla's book has enlightened. I came into GTU as Dr. Dhalla was in the process of editing her book, this book, and it was her MA. I got my MA, and she was my advisor. Not knowing that what Dr. Dhalla was working on, we talked about what I wanted to work on, which is women's voices within the Baha'i and Islam tradition being voiced and giving them their voices that their due diligence of like their men counterparts. And I do have a question, but I'm going to wait for the question and answers. But one of the things I would love to and say is that that it is a powerful and I say powerful as in a book that can, as a emerging scholar, I can look at and not necessarily repeat, but emulate in my own studies on how I can bring the voices of the Christian and Muslim and Baha'i martyrs women martyrs that I'm working on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raya. Wonderful, wonderful. I will now move to Diane Saunders as our second student respondent. Looking forward to hearing from you, Diane.
You can hear me okay?
Hear you great. Yeah.
Okay, great. I just thank you for this opportunity to share and to dive deeper into Dr. Dhalla's scholarship. I'm looking at chapter 2, which is entitled Faduk, More Than a Land Dispute. I'll first go over a few key facts that Dr. Dhalla establishes in chapter 2 that have a great deal of implications for inspiring liberative practices and pedagogy for contemporary feminist thought. So to sort of set the scene, as she has explained the sermon and the story of Fatima, the conflict begins really in chapter 2. And although there are varying versions of how Faduk was acquired, among all Muslims, it is unanimous that it was acquired peacefully by the Prophet Muhammad without a war. According to the Quran, when lands were acquired without mobilizing troops, it became the private property of the Prophet, and he bequeathed the land to his daughter Fatima. The Quran also states the rights of Kubra, which means to give the relative what is their due. The understanding was the Prophet transferred ownership to Fatima to honor this verse, and it was followed up with a document. It was understood that if the Prophet gave it to her, God gave it to her. Fatima was assumed responsibility for managing the process of the land. However, after the Prophet Muhammad, her father, died, Abu Bakr confiscated Faduk, saying it belonged to the Muslim community. In Shia literature, this is often, quote, cited to prove the injustices and oppressions endured by the Prophet's family and descendants post his death. Difficulties among the male leadership ensued after his death, and Abu Bakr assumed power and dismissed Fatima's deputies from Faduk. His intent of the proceeds resulted in male leadership seeking the riches of Faduk for worldly gains. The results of this injustice have trickled down throughout the ages. And I set that up as Dr. Dhalla establishes these facts and realities of the story and the relationship and the challenges of Fatima in the whole story, and what leads to the sermon of Fatima. And so just to set that up, and then I will now share some of the qualities and the actions of Fatima that Dr. Dhala shares, and the implications it has for feminist theory and practice today. Fatima exhibited amazing qualities. She demonstrated she had the knowledge and understanding for leadership, and leadership that would serve the common good of all. Therefore, it's important for women to engage fully in learning at the highest levels available within and without of their faith traditions. Within her argument in presenting her case to Abu Bakr, she's able to recite the Quran from memory and had the ability to proclaim it in the name of justice. She had firsthand knowledge and clarity of the sacred text as she listened and learned from her father, the founder, at the earliest roots of the faith tradition. Therefore, it is in the strength and power, there is strength and power in a tradition's sacred text. It is most important that women have the opportunity to learn and study the sacred and original sources of their tradition without the biases of the secondhand patriarchal lenses. Because Fatima had a deep and full understanding of her faith tradition, she was able to theologically argue her case. Therefore, theological learning and understanding gives women authority and freedom to develop and strengthen and find empowerment in their voices. Fatima could see into the political defiance. She could see into the political defiance that was at work as the men argued for power and leadership. She advocated for the ability to care for the community. Therefore, regardless of gender, when one is motivated by a purity of heart and not blinded by self-interest and self-importance, one is able to stay free and strong to advocate for the care of family life, the care of the community. And it is important to learn from her story, to be aware of how toxic alliances and can lead people astray. Fatima had relational authority. The male leadership realized that people admired her, and she could, for this reason, pose a threat. Therefore, there is an authority to be found in the sense of the people. The community believed and trusted in Fatima. Relational authority can be trusted and can be foundational to social change. It became a crucial contest of female inheritance, and her resilience and example continues to live beyond her. Female religious leadership amidst debated power dynamics brings an unlimited ripple effect. Therefore, every energetic effort to restore equity and equality will have an effect. Waves of feminism, for example, have gone out generations before us that we are benefiting from immensely. Waves can go out sometimes slowly, but they can move mountains over time. Fatima loved, and she loved her father deeply, and she grieved the loss of him and the loss of his wishes. Therefore, love is an ultimate power within its own right, as God is love. After Fatima delivered her sermon, she described the prophet's death is like the earth devoid of rain. Therefore, poetry, image, and ritual can bring truth to light in an embodied way. It is important to embrace grief and trauma with the significant loss when wisdom leadership is dismissed and compromised. Fatima dies soon after the power dynamics went askew. Therefore, it's important that women enter into power dynamics, realizing it can break one's spirit. Women need to learn to create parameters for relational support and self-care. The battles ensued to return the property to Fatima's progeny acknowledge the integrity of her claim, a community until the truth is established and justice is restored, becomes destabilized without justice restored. Therefore, truth and injustice cannot be erased. It will continue to be present and destabilize a community until it is reestablished. As Dr. Dhala outlines many stories from Fatima's life of great integrity and generosity, as noted when she delivered her sermon, she sought the wishes of the prophet, she sought to honor the words of the Quran, the sacred text, and claim the desired place for women in leadership and ownership as indicated by the prophet. Fatima held a role of honor as daughter, mother, and wife. She had power in those roles along with her demonstration of an impeccable character. She also had the respect and honor of the people, all demonstrated her place for leadership in being a powerful role model. This lies in contrast to the behavior, intentions, and character of the men who took what had been entrusted from her. In closing, I would like to congratulate Dr. Dhala as she has brought forth from her tradition powerful wisdom and insights from the life of Fatima, offering a significant contribution for feminist theory. And I just wanted to share in closing, I have heard Dr. Dhala speak on her scholarship on the Sermon of Fatima before, and I had an opportunity to apply her wisdom within my own Catholic faith tradition when I had the opportunity to speak before a board of clerics. And I was reminded by her scholarship, I was reminded by Fatima. And through that, I found clarity in my voice and a profound ability to speak truth. And I watched as that truth loosened the grips and the fears of patriarchal leadership within my own tradition. So I just thank you and congratulate you so much on this beautiful work, Dr. Dhala. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. Our next student respondent will be Latessa Eisler. Over to you. Looking forward to hearing from you. Can't quite hear you yet, unfortunately. No. If you need a minute to look at the settings, that's totally fine. We can maybe move forward to Yan and Lou, and then we'll come back to you in about 5 to 7 minutes. If that works, great. We'll hear from you in a few minutes. Yanan, if you don't mind, we'd love to hear your response. I think you're still on mute there. Sorry to make you jump ahead. Maybe you weren't quite ready. That's all right. It gives us all an opportunity to just take a little mini stretch break for a second. All right, Tianat, are you ready?
So should I go first?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll come back to the Latessa in a
Okay.
minute.
Thank you, Dr. Dhala, for this pioneering work, which powerfully illustrates how Fatima challenged the patriarchal norm in her time and shaping the Islam theology and social justice concept. I greatly appreciate your dedication to uncovering the narrative of pre-modern Muslim women. Similar to my research on the pre-modern Chinese Christian women. These women may not use the language of the modern feminism, but they were not the passive bystander. These women were not only the object of the evangelization, but active creator of the Chinese church and also active contributor to the development of the Chinese theology. I focus on the chapter 4. In this chapter, Dr. Dhala mentioned that the prophet leadership mode in Fatima's sermon, emphasizing the leadership role as a transformational leader, teacher leader, and the guardian leader. Through the leadership model, Fatima advocated for a form of leadership which is gender and class inclusive, people-focused, and service-based. This leadership mode demonstrates deep care for the well-being of the community, aiming to transform individuals and societies into their best levels. It sought to dismantle unjust systems, reconstruct through knowledge and education, and ultimately reshape communities through wisdom. This approach placed the people's need at the center and put the service over the pursuit of power. Through her concept of leadership, Fatima advocated for her family's inheritance rights from the prophet and demonstrate their acumen for justice leadership. It challenged the traditional mode that elevates the only influential male leaders who often serve the interests of the elites within their community. Through this kind of leadership, Fatima created a space to acknowledge and appreciate the contribution made to a thriving society by minorities of gender and class. This kind of leadership also honored the contributions of women as mother, partners, and the community service provider. So their contribution to their community, to their family, also were recognized. I'm curious about how Fatima practiced this kind of gender and class inclusive, people-focused, service-based leadership in her daily life. Were there other Islam women with similar space, power, or position in her time? And considering the 7th century context, it was uncommon for women to preach to a predominantly male audience. I wonder whether her family background, for example, being the daughter of the Muhammad, granted her more authority or space to assert her voice on religious, political, and social matters. In my research on the Chinese Christian women, I found that pre-modern Chinese women often create space and empower themselves through the support of male relatives and family networks. This kind of research also reminds me it's crucial to understand their life choice and theological insight within the context of their social environment and family ties. So I'm interested in how Fatima's family background and the social context influence her theological insights. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. Let's return to Latessa. Hopefully, we'll be able to hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yay. Oh, that's wonderful. Looking for remarks.
Okay. So first, thank you, GTU, WSR, and Dr. Dhala for the opportunity to participate in this panel and discuss her lovely work. Chapter 3 of Dr. Dhalla's book, A Profound Exploration of Women's Theology, delves into two theological themes from the sermon, showcasing her deep understanding and insightful analysis. The themes are God's transcendent nature and the interconnection of choices in life and the consequences after death. Dr. Dhala addresses God's transcendent nature in the first section of the chapter entitled Describing the Indescribable. As a Vajrayana Buddhist, I found this section and the title amusing because the emptiness of inherent existence is also characterized as indescribable, though there are baskets and baskets of scripture and subsequent commentaries that attempt to describe the indescribable and make the unknown known. This concept of the indescribable is a fascinating point of comparison between different religious traditions, prompting us to consider if there's a universal truth for all religions in the description of being indescribable. Belief in a singular creator God is fundamental in Islam. It's a core to the tenets of the religion, and it's an undeniable truth for believers. In the sermon, Fatima demonstrates masterfully that she's internalized the understanding of this principle and the philosophical debates around it. She said, I bear witness that there is no God besides Allah who is unique and has no associates. Denied are sights from his vision, minds from his characterization, and intellects from his description. In her analysis of Fatima's speech, Dr. Dhala analyzes the first sentence to include evidential and negational attributes, the former of which are affirmed and the latter rejected. Dr. Dhala outlines that theologians differ sharply in their understanding of God's attributes, with one camp denying the validity of the descriptive attributes, and the other believing that God can be described by attributes. In her speech, Fatima adopts a balanced approach, affirming the existence of a singular creator, God, Allah, while acknowledging the incomprehensibility of God's transcendence. This balanced approach runs along the same vein as the Prasangika Madhyamika middle way consequences school's philosophical arguments regarding existence. This school of thought, which is a significant part of Buddhist philosophy, posits that on a conventional level, phenomena do not exist inherently and cannot be ultimately grasped. This balanced or middle way approach dispels both absolutism and nihilism, offering a nuanced perspective on existence. The ability to consider two diametric philosophical views and find a balanced or middle approach is masterful. It demonstrates Fatima's wisdom and Dr. Dhalla's insightful understanding of her inspiring theological sophistication. Now, according to Fatima, God initiates life for the manifestation of wisdom, the servility of his subjects, and the exaltation of his call. Dr. Dhala explains that one of the names of God is Al-Hakim, the wise. Muhammad gives her Fadak, and because he trusts her and he knows that she'll manage it wisely. She treats the people that live there with fairness, uses the proceeds from the land to support communal needs. Her sense of social justice, which is effortlessly germinated from her scriptural seeds planted within her, is a shining example of justice and equality. Dr. Dalla writes, besides deploying the Quran as a theological tool to make her case, Fatima raises Muslims' consciousnesses to the significant role that the Quran plays in shaping their life experiences. The Quran is a central text in Islam, not only providing theological guidance, but also influencing the daily lives and actions of Muslims, as Fatima's story and sermon demonstrates. Our lived experience is ruled by our perceptions. Another interesting element of this chapter is Dr. Dalla's exploration of the two means of perception, physical or the sense perception, and the heart. In Buddhist philosophy, there's also a detailed understanding of sense perception as a means for experiencing phenomena. And like Islam, the heart is understood to be more than just an organ. It's the seat of knowledge and volition, and is often described as heart-mind. But unlike Islam, it's not the carrier of the soul, but it's the subtlest level of energy that moves from life to life, carrying imprints of karma with it. One clear commonality is the understanding that unethical, predatory actions have consequences. In the afterlife, though the view of what comes after is different, right? So in conclusion, this chapter links Fatima's protest to her deep theological understanding of the Quran. It shatters the stereotype of pacifism as a social location for Islamic women, replacing it with a view of feminist protest born from piety and wisdom that dates back to the 7th century. To quote Dr. Dalla, Fatima mobilizes theological themes of the purpose of life and the faculty of intellect to remind herself, the Caliph, and the Muslims that as God's creatures, that they play a strategic role in determining how faith impacts the unfolding of events. The Caliphate confiscated her property, and the Muslims watched. Fatima used this as an opportunity to demonstrate how a disempowered minority can challenge actions of injustice perpetrated by those in power. Thank you so much for this beautiful work. I enjoyed it very, very much.
And thank you so much for your response. Now, last but certainly not least, we have Zainab Vessel. Looking forward to hearing from you today as well.
You invite my voice?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Wonderful. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you so much, Dr. Dalla, for that amazing book. I really recommend this book for everybody. That's a really unique, in different way, specifically about the Muslim woman in early Islamic time. How many books we have in general about the daughter of the prophets? I think that's unique in different way. And specifically about the Fatima Zahra, we have no research or any study about the daughter of the Prophet of Islam in Western academia. We have so many books in different languages like Farsi. We have a lot of, scholarly approach, but amazingly, there is none Western academic book about this important figure in, and I should mention that there is some, sample about the Quranic approach about the women. There are a lot of work about the how Quran introduced the women, giving them some rights, or there is some theological approach based on Quran, but there is not any books about early Islamic figures like Fatima Zahra and their characters working on their sermons and some things like that. So in this way, that was really, for me, really amazing to be able to read this book. And specifically, since my mother's name was Fatima Zahra and my name is Zainab, mother and daughter, that was really kind of emotional for me. I always thinking unconsciously about those, important figure in Islam. So that was really amazing to read that. And about this book, the chapter 5 of Dr. Dhalla's book is really captivating and easy to read. Amazingly showing the line of Fatima's teaching and inspiration through the history like the other sections. And this section showcasing years of thought and research and scholarly life of the Dr. Dhallahs and the Fatimas and her profound social influences. The chapter introducing 3 key figures combining historical and contemporary example to illustrate how Fatima's legacy has inspired women across generations. The first 2 characters, Asma and Fizza, for me as a Shia Muslim born in the Middle East, and I had always all of those, narrations, stories in the school everywhere about the Asma, about the Fizza, was not a unique thing, but Dr. Dhallah's approach and bringing up all of those narration and forming a line of their life in those sections, what was really amazing for me. But the most important things in this chapter for me, which what truly stands out in this chapter, is the introduction of a third figure, Amina Sadr, known as Bintul Huda Sadr, a contemporary activist, the sister of the revolutionary Muhammad Baqir Sadr. She is portrayed as a modern-day embodiment of a Fatima's teaching. Her activism against the Ba'ath regime in Iraq through education, writing, and a social reform, mirroring the values of Fatima and her resistance to oppression, the pursuit of justice, and the dedication to bettering society. So the Dr. Dhallah's inclusion of Bintul Huda Sadr illustrates how the legacy of Fatima continues to inspire contemporary Muslim women, linking her to historical figures like Asma and Fidda, and creating a powerful narration of a continuity. After those few pages, which I think it's really unique, and since there are a lot of connection between the women and the resistance movement right now in the Middle East, specifically the narration mentioning the 3 days fasting of Fatima Zahra and Fidda with them, and the hardship they passed through the reciting and chanting all of those. It's really inspiring for the women in Middle East right now, in Gaza, in other places which have a hardship for finding food and all of those, starvation. In this chapter, Dr. Dhallah grappled with the complex issue of identifying authentic followers of Fatima, especially in a world where many may claim to be inspired by her, but few truly live up to her values. The chapter invites the reader to reflect on the discussion between those who use Fatima's legacy for personal or political purposes and those who are genuinely committed to the principle of justice and humanities. And chapter 5 presented rich and thoughtful exploration of Fatima's enduring legacy and her influence on a woman throughout Islamic history. And Dr. Dalla carefully selection of figures from both early Islam and the modern era, such as Bintul Huda Sadr, demonstrates the ongoing relevance of Fatima's teaching. This chapter underscores how the value she embodied continue to inspire women in their pursuit of justice and social reform, making Fatima's example a powerful force even today. And then she moving to the contemporary feminist theories and theologies in Islamic scholarship. Often mirror Fatima's approach in her sermon, even without directly referencing her. And scholars like Martin Negwan and Hamid Dabashi emphasizing faith as a tool for social justice and resistance against oppression, echoing Fatima's stance in early Islam was really amazing for starting this section. Negwan sees rituals like prostration as an act of protest, while Dabashi highlighting Shia mourning ritual of Muharram, which I'm working on this section somehow in this topic, as a symbol of protest rooted in a principle of justice. Muslimah theology, represented by a scholar like Joshua Tanner, critiques particular interpretation of Islamic texts and a call for a return to the Quran to reclaim women's rights. Although those scholars don't explicitly cite Fatima, their focus on gender justice and empowerment align with her methods. Additionally, Ednan Aslan and Miriam Cook emphasizing Fatima's political activism, highlighting her public challenges to Abu Bakr as a pivotal moment in women empowerment. And recent works by scholars such as Gabi Kunkler and Stewart explore Fatima's role in shaping female leadership within Islam, showing her lasting influence on both feminism and Islamic liberation theology. And Fatima remains a key figure in contemporary discussion on justice, gender, and social activism. And then the book's going to the conclusion. But the important things for me is that the possibility of following the line of Dr. Dalla for adding more example unknown figures in a modern and contemporary time, and comparing them with the other figures in early Islamic times, the people like Zainab Salabi, Nadia Yassin, or Zainab al-Ghazali, the other figures. For example, Zainab al-Ghazali is an Egyptian Islamist, or Nadia Yassin is a Moroccan Islamist. All of those mentioning Fatima in their work and their writing. Or an Iraqi American humanitarian, Salabi, she actually trying to following the Fatima's footprint and then establishing a kind of international woman for woman organization. And those is a really, I think, good example for the student of the Dr. Dalla and everyone who's working in this area to just following this line, this amazing line of the work of Dr. Dalla and adding the other figures. I know Dr. Dalla, she doing the same things right now and trying to finishing her second book. And that was really for me a great opportunity to be in a school, have her as my second advisor, and a great source for, inspiration and working on primary sources to find out and bring out all of those values after the Fatima impacting on our society. For me, I'm working on a matter of culture, but her work actually made me eager to go deeper and finding the impact of Fatima Zahra on material culture of the Muslim world. As we know, she was a great source for many things. Thank you, Dr. Dalla, again for that amazing, impactful work. And I really be honored to have your signature in front of this amazing, work of yours. And I'm eager to see your next one. Thank you for everybody for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Zainab. And thank you so much to our whole student panel. This has been very insightful and very thorough. And I appreciate so much the close attention to the text, but as well as the connections to each of your individual traditions and scholarship as well. So thank you so much for bringing forth those rich connections. Dr. Dalla, would you like to respond at all to what the panelists shared before we move into our open questions? If you'd like to respond to anything, I'd just like to give you a moment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I just want to take a moment to say that this is more than what a scholar can ask for. You know, this is like, wow. You took this time. I can see that you are either driving back home from work, or you are at your workplace, or you're just taking things out of your bag, you know, from coming back from university, and you have still made time to engage so deeply in the with the chapter. So I am so grateful for your reflections. Thank you so much, really. Yeah, I just want to say thanks. And if there's time, maybe I can sort of, delve into some of the questions that you raised, Cheryl. Some that I'm seeing from Zainab Diab in the chat. She's from the University of Montreal, Université de Montréal. And thank you, with your 3-hour difference and so many time differences and so many time zones I'm seeing with the participants. Thank you so much for making time. I'm reminded something that our dean, Christopher Acker, just said at a recent meeting that he had with the faculty, where we were, worried about what we usually do, numbers, admissions, deferrals, and all those housekeeping items. And he said something that has stayed with me, throughout my preparation and just stayed with me. And I think it will stay with me. And he said, our work at the GTU is not defined by trends. It's defined by our students. That was just so profound, and it's just stayed with me. It played with me all my commute back from Berkeley, and I was like, wow, this is what we're all about here at the GTU. It's our students, and the amazing way in which, Yanan, you looped it in with pre-modern Christian theologians, and Diane, your personal experience of actually just facing up to that evening where you were, and Latessa, like weaving that into the Buddhist path of the middle way, and the thinking about describing the undescribable. That was just amazing. Raya, you're going to make so much from this with your dissertation that you're working on, on comparative a comparative analysis of female martyrs across traditions. And Zainab, you're just going to make such a beautiful, pioneering contribution to material religion and material culture, because the work that you're doing on the metal filials has also not been done yet. So I'm really looking forward to that dissertation as well. So that's just me as just celebrating and honoring everyone here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, let's maybe dive into some of our questions in this case. I think that supporting our students, I think maybe we want to turn back, open behind the curtain a little bit, and maybe demystify a little bit about the process of writing. So I'm just wondering if you'd like to reflect at all on the chapter of the book that you found either most intriguing or challenging to write. And perhaps to also tie in Raya's great question about, as an emerging scholar, any advice that you might have on applying these modern post-Enlightenment perspectives to pre-modern figures such as Fatima. So maybe, yeah, a little bit about writing the book, and then also maybe any advice that you'd offer to other emerging scholars.
Yeah, so thanks for those questions. Great questions, all of them, even if we don't get to all of them right now. But writing the book really required me to sort of create a gut of steel, because for the 20 years that I was talking about this work in my own community, we had to disguise it. Like, I can't use the right words because I will just expose the people who are trying to do this work, but something like an Avon tutorial or a cooking lesson, and we couldn't really say that we were actually opening the sermon and we were diving deep down into the theological points of it. which for me was paradoxical, because while we were mourning Fatima during the days of mourning, the ritual mourning was quite okay. It was not so threatening. But somehow opening up the sermon, asking questions, who is saying to whom, what is being said at what juncture, was so disencouraged, was, so it was so hard to have an open platform to be able to talk about these things, to even name the figures involved. So it took those 2 years to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And when I finally landed myself here at the GTU, I found the perfect place to do this kind of work. And the hardest part, I must say, I mean, besides all of this, was trying to write everything that was racing in my head, to write it in such a way that students from different religious traditions could relate with it. And I think I might have done something right, because I'm seeing, so many different perspectives engaging with this work. That was the most difficult thing, and especially the chapter that you expounded on, Latessa. How was I going to translate all those pure classical Islamic theological terms to hold the attention of my reader that might have maybe not that much, who might not be so invested in Islamic epistemologies. So I think that was a really difficult, part, where I had to think and rethink, write and rewrite, to make sure that I was including every student in the undergraduate class or in a graduate theological setting, and including and offering access to engage at whatever experiential level they brought to this work. Raya, your question, and Raya is asking this question because she's in my Islamic studies class this semester, and we are talking methodologies in Islamic studies in US academia. And we are, yes, saying, and this somehow relates to Cheryl, your question as well. Might there be a term that we could use to frame this kind of work that we're doing? And the answer is, well, we're using the tools of the master, and we are using the language of the master. Before I could talk about this pre-modern Muslim woman, I needed to master the language of the master and to master the tools of the master in US academia. So it's really hard. And this is what we're doing. And Raya, you want to do this too. You want to talk about martyrdom. You want to speak about Baha'i women, and you want to compare their relevance to the relevance of martyrs, female martyrs in Christianity and in Islam. And you are also looking for those tools and methodologies. And you know what? We will just end up using non-Indigenous tools. But as long as we can do the reparative work, then I think we should just go ahead with it.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you for those reflections. Sometimes we've got to be strategic, but we've also got to be visionary and figure out what's the moment to do which. So thank you for those very helpful reflections. You'll see Zainab had a very specific question to ask about the naming of the dynasties. So I don't know if you'd like to reflect on that. Maybe you read the question about when the Shia came to power in Egypt in the 10th century. Why did they name themselves the Fatimid dynasty rather than following the example of other dynasties? So if you'd like to take that one on personally, feel free to do so. Or maybe the more general question from our other scholar, Zainab, coming from Montreal, but the question about relating your research to the current challenges of gendered Islamophobia in the West. I think both the more specific as well as the more general question are both very interesting. So would love to hear your response to either or both if you'd like.
Yeah, both Zainabs are posing really great questions, and Zainab Diab has her work as well, extraordinary work, around Islamophobia. And it's just an honor to have her here spending this time with us this evening. And I will say that, yes, there are implications, and I think it does relate, because the body of a visibly Muslim woman has become an essential Islamophobic trope through which the general media, the general population is now imagining the place of Islam and Muslims in the larger worldview. So whether we like it or not, I think as we walk out there as visibly Muslim women, we are invoking questions as we walk down that aisle to pick up our brand of cereal, or if we walk into a bank, or if we are asked to set apart in that TSA line for a special pat down. So it's just it's so hard to disconnect that. Sometimes, I struggle. Is it the grassroots level activism that we need right now? And again, Cheryl, your question, the platforms that people are using today, or shall we do the ivory tower kind of work that we do, the nitty gritty of approaches and theoretical frameworks to break down the knowledge and wisdom that indigenous populations have? And I think it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of both. So I think research like this is absolutely connected and relates to the Islamophobic gendered or the gendered Islamophobia that we're witnessing in North America and of course in Europe. Maybe just in 1 minute, Zainab, yes, of course, the Fatimid dynasty that comes to power in Egypt. I think this is, it's best to stay short here because the Shia dynasty, Shiism in itself has many different facets and many different renditions. What I am doing with this book is talking about the Twelver Shia perspective, and the Fatimid dynasty is coming from the Ismaili Shia and the Dawoodi, Shia perspectives. And those are different chains. So they each has their own dynamics and nuances on how they want to take up the figure of Fatima. What I am doing is I am acknowledging Fatima as this devoted mother and this dedicated wife and this person, and all that is great. But I am also saying that for all these centuries, you have talked about her as this woman, wife, daughter, mother. I want to talk about her as a troublemaker, as an agitator, and she is just as beautiful and just as pious when she's doing that.
Amen to that. Zainab, I would so love to call on you and to hear more, but perhaps you two can continue the conversation in the future, because unfortunately I do need to pass over the mic to Carissa to wrap us up. But thank you again so much to Dr. Dhala, to our panelists, and to everyone for being here this evening. It's been just a delight and a privilege.
Thank you, Cheryl. We've worshiped together, studied together, written together, taught together. It's great to have you. Thank you.
What a wonderful event to be a part of and to vision for. It has been a blessing and a privilege to watch each of you as scholars share your voice and see how everything interconnects. It's been fantastic. And I wrote a few notes as we were going through this, and I thought about Diane when she said, "We are waves moving mountains over time." And I thought, using compassion, using intellect, using protest. And then I thought, we're being troublemakers and agitators, offering new pathways of justice, to use Dr. Dalla's language. Whenever we encounter oppression, may we be a part of a movement that initiates resistance. And what kind of legacy will we leave in this world? And even noticing when the crows cry out and the earth cry out as divine signs. I'm going to probably mispronounce this word, hirja, as hirja of Islam. And what a beautiful concept to be introduced to. We have heard from Baha'i, Christian, Buddhist, Islam, all of these different faiths talking and communicating with one another. And I want to especially express gratitude for Dr. Dalla and her recent publication and just her way of living and being in the world. I want to express gratitude to our student panelists, to each of you who was willing to take on this responsibility and bring your scholarly voice to light in dialogue with Dr. Dalla, to Raya, to Diane, to Latessa, to Yanan, to Zainab, to Cheryl, who was willing to step up and be our moderator and do a fabulous job bringing everything together, to Kali, who helped organize the event and get all of you registered here and what have you, all of that. We could not have done it. It took a village to get all of this together. And we are celebrating also this current issue that is getting ready to come forth and will be published by the end of the year. And it celebrates the Women's Study in Religion program. And it has a keynote lecture from Dr. Dhala. It has a piece by Diane Saunders on the Women's Study in Religion program at the GTU. It has an article from two of our panelists. So Latessa has an article as well as Shannon in this piece, among other articles. So make sure to look out for that. That is coming by the end of the year. And then in the early spring, you're going to see a call for papers as well as a call for art for our next issue. And it is going to be an issue centered on liberation theology and anti-imperialism with a special focus on Palestine. So we look forward to seeing you submit your articles for that as well. Including in this issue that's coming out by the end of the year, we're inviting someone to do a book review of Dr. Dahla's book to be concluded in the next issue. So look out for that as well. It has been a glorious night with each of you, and I hope that you will each consider how you are being called to be a voice of resistance wherever there's oppression, to celebrate different traditions coming together, to work as a visionary call for justice and ethics and inclusive scholarship wherever you are. Are there any other announcements that need to be lifted up? Then we thank you all for being here. What a joy and privilege it has been to be here. Thank you and take care, everyone.